And we start with breaking news in the last 20 minutes. Gary Lineker is to step back from presenting Match of the Day until an agreement has been made regarding his social media use. Now, the news follows an impartiality row over comments Lineker made criticising the government's new asylum policy. He compared the language used by Suella Braverman to Germany in the 1930s. In a statement, the BBC said, the BBC has decided that he will step back from presenting Match of the Day until we've got an agreed and clear position on his use of social media. When it comes to leading our football and sports coverage, Gary is second to none. We have never said that Gary should be an opinion-free zone or that he can't have a view on issues that matter to him. But we have said that he should keep well away from taking sides on party political issues or political controversies. Well, joining me now is Aaqil Ahmed, former head of religion and ethics at BBC and Channel 4. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, is this a welcome decision by the BBC?
I think it's a decision that I'm not surprised that they've taken, because obviously they do need to have a policy with regards to Gary and not just Gary, but in general, everybody else. Because what you've got to remember is Gary Lineker is not a news and current affairs presenter. He's a presenter of sports programming, in particular football programming. So it seems quite strange that, he would be held to the same kind of level of scrutiny that you would actually hold a current affairs presenter to. But because this is a fast-moving area with regards to what people expect from people with regards to social media and the kind of things that can be said and the mistakes you can make and the tone where you can get wrong, that I understand there needs to be a conversation. But I think we have to be clear about this as well, which is he's not a current affairs presenter. So therefore, if he has an opinion, then he is entitled to have an opinion. No. The problem becomes, how is that opinion then linked to with regards to his role with the BBC? Now, he is a freelance presenter, remember, Nana. He's not actually full-time with the BBC. He does work for other broadcasters as well. So that is the reason why I think that this is a welcome conversation, not just about Gary, but about the whole of presenting and workforce as well for the BBC in terms of what they can and can't say.
Well, Aaqil, I'm going to say that that's actually what you said there is slightly incorrect. And you know why I know this? Because I worked at the BBC as a presenter, and I know that actually they brought everything into closer alignment. So whether you were sports or whether you were news, you were still bound by a similar code. And they closed the gap. And I know this. Sorry, let me finish because I listened to you. They closed the gap, and they closed the gap in the time I was there, and they closed the gap on me. So radio presenters were able to say stuff a bit more than news presenters and so on and so forth, but then they closed the gap. And Tim Davies specifically said that actually he didn't care who you are, he's going to make sure that the BBC remains completely impartial. He did a big old speech in 2021, and we all know that, and Gary knows that. And in fact, we all had impartiality training, and the reason I left the BBC was because I couldn't speak, and I too, like Gary, was a freelancer, yet was forced into IR35, and I was not allowed to speak either. So he is bound by the same rules as everybody else.
Within reason, not totally, because obviously there is no impartial. It's a very different level of impartiality when you're a news and current affairs presenter. No, I understand exactly what you're saying, which is why I think it's the right thing to do, to have a wider conversation, because it's not simply possible. I don't think it's possible to say that everybody is the same when you work for an organisation like the BBC or any kind of major organisation of that nature, because not everybody does the same kind of role and not everybody has the same kind of contract. That's why I believe that they have to have this conversation now and understand that in going forward, you'll have nobody working for you if you're not allowed to have an opinion in some form or other.
Exactly the point. Which is why I left the BBC, because I couldn't have an opinion. Yet I was not, but I was a freelancer, and they certainly weren't paying me enough to not work for anybody else. So in a sense, in my view, it was almost like a form of constructive dismissal, because you had to go, because otherwise you'd never make up enough money, and so you had to leave because you couldn't have an opinion on any other channel. And actually, I myself lost 2 shows because I said something on a different channel that the BBC weren't happy with. So I lost something, and I wasn't news as it were, and I was kind of more radio at the time. I'd done news and I'd done all that. So I welcome the conversation, but Gary knows that he shouldn't have been speaking in that way. Surely you must admit that what they were saying in terms of political stature, because it sounds like, if you imagine a lot of, it's sort of like the BBC feel like they have a left-wing bias. And do you feel that they perhaps felt pressure from politicians?
I think that there's an element of that, because I don't think if you follow Gary on Twitter, I actually follow him on Twitter. If you follow him on Twitter, he has an opinion on a lot of things. Now, you can ask the same question about, say, another Gary Neville, who's on, not on BBC, but on Sky and ITV. I think he's done ITV work as well. I mean, he's very opinionated. There's no getting around it. So it's actually interesting why Gary Lineker would be picked on more than, say, Gary Neville.
Well, because he works for the BBC. No, because he works for the BBC, which is funded by the licence payer.
That's my point. There are lots of people who work. Andrew Neil was very opinionated, and actually, I follow him as well, and I like a lot of what he says. But he's also opinionated. So the fact of the matter is, you're right. They do think there's a left-wing bias because of Gary's particular opinions.
Well, Tim Davey admitted it.
Etc.
Yeah.
Well, no, they may think that. I'm not saying they do. I don't speak on their behalf, Nana. I'm saying they may think that. I can understand that, but I keep going back to that central point, which is the system as it stands has to be looked at, because everybody is on social media. When I was the head of religion, I wasn't on social media for obvious reasons, which was it would have made my life a misery, because when I say something on social media, there's a bunch of people that will jump out of nowhere and say, and I don't say many things that are controversial anyway, simply because of a lot of the roles that I have. So I'm not here saying that it should be a free-for-all. I'm simply saying, if you present news programmes, I think it's one thing. If you present other programmes like sport or cookery or whatever it is, I think there needs to be a bit of leeway here. I think there needs to be, you can have a conversation about what he actually said, but should he be allowed to say it? In my opinion, of course, because he's not a news and
no, he shouldn't.
That's what we need to address.
No, he shouldn't be allowed to say that, because he also has a responsibility. And remember, he's working for literally, it's pretty much a state-owned broadcaster, right? So why on earth should we be paying for him to give us his opinions? If you want to work for the BBC, that's fine, but you must accept the rule. And if the rule is that they are impartial, then so must you be. If you don't want to work for there are other organisations to work for. Thank you very much, Aaqil. Really good to talk to you. That's Aaqil Ahmed. He's a former head of religion and ethics at the BBC.